it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. There was no safe place left. Not hospitals, not bridges, not anywhere people could run for help. In a single night, New York turned into a burning trap. And I survived by doing the opposite of everyone else. Alone, constantly moving, I slipped through the cracks while the city died behind me. This is the story of how I made it out on the first day, when the rules of the world broke, and survival meant never standing still. Zombie Apocalypse, Queens, by Augustus Cordoba. Part 1. I dragged myself awake at 6 sharp, yanked out of sleep by my neighbor's alarm screaming through the paper-thin walls of my Queens apartment. That same tinny stabbing beep I'd been hearing every weekday for 3 damn years. I stayed on my back for a minute, my eyes locked on the water stain spreading across the ceiling, a crooked shape like a map to some place I'd never see, and I listened to the city claw its way into morning. Sirens whining far off, the subway grinding under the pavement, somebody 2 floors down barking in Spanish like they were already in a fight. October in New York cut different. The air leaking through my cracked window had teeth, not cold enough to justify heat, but not warm enough to be kind. Just uncomfortable enough to keep you tense. I hauled myself out of bed and brewed instant coffee in the dented little pot on the counter, right beside a pile of unpaid bills I'd been dodging for a couple of weeks. The stuff tasted scorched and metallic, like it had been filtered through rust, but it was hot and wired me up, and that was enough. I showered, pulled on the same jeans and button-down I'd worn a few days earlier, and headed downstairs to the street where my cab waited. Yellow paint worn thin, rear bumper still crumpled from some tourist who clipped me and then vanished before I could get a plate. I turned the key. The engine fought me, coughed twice, and finally caught on the 3rd try, spitting blue smoke into the morning before settling into its usual ugly growl. 7:30. Time to bleed the day for cash. On the expressway was its usual war zone. Delivery trucks choking lanes. Some BMW asshole slicing through the traffic like the rest of us didn't exist. A bus vomiting diesel that burned my eyes even with the windows sealed. I slid into the current and let instinct take over. Stop, surge, calculate, switch lanes, repeat. 8 years behind the wheel meant my hands moved before I even thought. My phone chirped at 7:45. First fare. Upper West Side pickup. I took the Queensboro Bridge, skyline looming bigger with every mile, all glass and steel flashing under the morning sun. Well, the city looked normal, same as always, like nothing bad had ever happened here unless you were the one living it. The next hour passed clean. Routine runs, routine gridlock, routine faces. Kid with a gym bag glued to his phone. A woman in a sharp suit arguing into hers the entire ride about some meeting she'd probably forget in a week. Nothing strange, nothing off. And then 8:30 hit. The phone pinged again. Pickup near Columbia. I rolled uptown and something twisted in my gut before I even reached them. They were on the corner of Amsterdam and 116th. The guy was half carrying a girl about his age, college kids maybe. Well, she was bent forward, clutching her shoulder. Even from inside the cab I saw it, the stain spreading across her white blouse. Dark and slick, soaking through in uneven blotches that glistened wet. They tumbled into the back seat, the guy gasping like he'd sprinted a mile. "Hospital," he choked. "Mount Sinai, fast." I poured into the traffic, checking them in the mirror. God, she looked ghost pale. Sweat shining on her skin despite the chill. Eyes clamped shut, soft broken noises slipping out of her throat. He wrapped an arm around her, gripping her hand so tight his knuckles blanched. "Hey, what happened?" I asked, cutting south on Broadway. "Some guy on the subway," he said, voice shaking. "We were waiting for the doors, and He just grabbed her, bit her, right there on the platform. Oh, people started screaming. He let go. Oh, she's bleeding, man. God, she's bleeding so fucking much. I looked again. Her eyes were open now, but fixed on nothing. Tears streaked down her cheeks, blending with the sweat. Her lips moved without sound. Hey, you see him? I asked. Drunk? High? I don't know. His voice cracked a little. God, his eyes were just so weird, like he wasn't even looking at us. Oh man, and his teeth. He swallowed hard then. There was blood on him before he even bit her. Well, I kept driving. Some junkie, I figured, or someone cooked on whatever new chemical nightmare was floating around this month. It happened. Not every day, but enough. Hey, she'll make it, I told him. You hang on. Mount Sinai had a solid emergency department, or usually did. The girl let out another thin and broken sound. Oof, it was barely even human. The boyfriend leaned close, murmuring something I couldn't catch, his voice low and increasingly desperate. I drove harder than I should have, slipping through gaps, ignoring lights I normally wouldn't risk. Got them there in 18 minutes flat. Well, the first real hint that something was off hit me the second I rolled up to the emergency entrance. Well, the place wasn't busy. Busy, I understood. This was something else. It was drowning. People were jammed outside the doors, spilling onto the pavement. Some sat on the ground, wrapped in makeshift bandages, arms and legs and heads bound in gauze already soaked through. Others stood swaying like drunks about to drop. Security guards tried to herd the chaos into lines, barking instructions that nobody followed. Their faces were tight, all of them, strained even, men who knew they'd already lost control. The boyfriend hauled the girl out of the back. She could barely keep her feet under her. They locked an arm around her waist and half-dragged her toward the entrance. No payment, no words. They vanished into the knot of wounded bodies like they'd been swallowed. I shut the door and pulled away, hands clenched on the wheel harder than they needed to be. In the mirror, the hospital shrank behind me. The crowd got smaller with distance, but not less disturbing. That's when I did something I almost never did. I turned on the radio. Oh, fuck, I hated the damn thing. I really hated it. Celebrity garbage dressed up as news. Manufactured shouting matches designed to rile people up. Ads pushing insurance, couches, lives I couldn't afford and didn't want. It all felt engineered to needle at you, make you feel lesser, scared, jealous. I didn't have the bandwidth for that. No, I preferred silence. Let the city provide its own soundtrack. Horns, sirens, the grind of millions clawing towards somewhere else. But that morning, after the hospital, after watching a kid with blood on his hands vanish into a crowd that had no business existing at 8:45 on a Tuesday morning, well, I needed something. A frame, a reason, anything that made it fit. I spun the AM dial until I called a news station. Unusual levels of violence reported across multiple boroughs this morning. Police responding to what they're calling an unprecedented surge in assault calls. Sources at local hospitals say emergency rooms are nearing capacity. Static crackled, so I adjusted the knob. CDC has not issued an official statement, but health officials advise anyone bitten or scratched by another individual to seek immediate treatment. Early symptoms may include fever, confusion, heightened aggression, and more static, so I switched again. Residents are urged to remain calm. The mayor's office stresses there's no cause for panic, but recommends limiting travel and avoiding large gatherings until further information. I lowered the volume, left it murmuring. Those fragments circled in my head while I drove. A virus carried through teeth and blood. Aggression, hospitals buckling. My phone buzzed again, another fair request. I glanced at it and hit accept. What was the alternative? Hide in my apartment and rot in front of the TV? Oh, driving meant motion. Motion meant distraction. The next hour smeared together in hindsight. Pickups, drop-offs. Traffic thicker than usual, but still manageable. Yet things kept happening. Small fractures in the routine. Signs I should have read better. On Fifth Avenue, a man walked straight into my cab. Well, I was crawling maybe 10 miles an hour. He stepped off the curb without a glance, moving in this off-balance, jerky shuffle. I slammed the brakes, my tires squealing, but the bumper clipped him and dropped him onto the asphalt. I jumped out, my pulse hammering. He lay flat on his back in the street, didn't move. People began drifting closer, forming that familiar city circle of curiosity. But what stuck with me, what stayed lodged in my head, was how he didn't react. There was no groan, no clutching his side, no shouting blame, just nothing. He just lay there completely still, staring upward with eyes that weren't focusing on a damn thing. "Sir, you okay?" I dropped to a knee beside him, my hands hovering, not quite willing to touch. There was nothing. No blink, no twitch. His chest rose and fell, slowly, shallowly. Well, he was alive, just vacant. The ambulance showed up in under 5 minutes. 2 paramedics spilled out. I recognized the older one, grey hair wrenched into a tight bun, the kind of face that had seen too much and stopped pretending otherwise. "What happened?" she asked, kneeling opposite me. "Oh, he stepped right out in front of my cab," I told her. "I was barely moving, but still clipped him. He hasn't reacted to anything since." She flicked a penlight into his pupils, her fingers checking his pulse. Her partner ran practiced hands over the man's arms and legs, searching for breaks. Oh, they worked fast, automatic muscle memory, but something about them felt wrong. There was a heaviness, like they were already worn down past caring. Then the older paramedic leaned back and laughed. Well, it wasn't a laugh of joy. It was a sound someone made when reality stopped being funny hours ago. "Hey, what?" I asked. She looked straight at me, and something in her eyes prickled the back of my neck. "This," she said. "This is the most normal call we've had all morning." Before I could press her, they were lifting him onto a stretcher and sliding him into the ambulance. He never reacted, didn't even speak, didn't even acknowledge being flattened by a car. The door shut, the siren lit, and they vanished into the traffic. I stayed there on Fifth Avenue a moment longer than I should have, watching the lights disappear. My hands were shaking. When I got back behind the wheel, I just sat there gripping it, my knuckles pale. The radio kept murmuring. "National Guard units being mobilized to strategic locations. Governor urging calm while acknowledging a rapidly evolving situation. Similar incidents reported in New Jersey, Connecticut, and parts of Pennsylvania." Then my phone buzzed again. Another fare. I accepted. 3 more pickups over the next 90 minutes, each one dragging me closer to the airport. Each passenger more frayed than the last. A family hauling luggage like they were fleeing a fire. A couple snapping at each other about whether leaving was overreacting. Phones pressed to ears, voices sharp and rising. Everyone trying to decide what this thing was and how fast they needed to outrun it. The radio dripped new fragments into the air. "Infection may require several hours before symptoms fully appear. Avoid contact with individuals exhibiting abnormal behavior. Multiple hospitals reporting security breaches." And then I heard the word. Social media describing infected individuals as zombies. Though officials stress this is inaccurate and unhelpful when referring to what appears to be a neurological viral condition. Zombie. Fucking zombie. Damn, it hung there inside my cab, thick as exhaust fumes, tangling with horns and engines and the growing awareness that the city was slipping sideways. At 11:15 another ping came through. Midtown pickup. Good fare, airport run to JFK. I pulled up outside a glass and steel tower on Park Avenue. A man waited at the curb, late 40s, dressed in money. Suit sharp enough to cut skin. Italian leather on his feet. A watch worth more than my rent. Phone glued to his ear, briefcase clenched tight. He slid into the back without even acknowledging me. No, I don't care what Bernard says. He snapped into his phone. Tell him the jet's ready when I arrive. Then a pause. Yes, I'm aware of the ground stop. That's commercial traffic. This is private. Another pause. Don't inform anyone else. No calls. Just prepare everything. I'll be there in 30. Then he lowered the phone, met my eyes in the mirror. Hey, JFK, private aviation terminal, south side. Oh, step on it. I bored into the traffic, while he resumed dialing, one call bleeding into the next. Clipped orders, logistical triage, closed accounts, move money, fuel the aircraft, keep quiet. The message underneath it all was obvious. He was running, and he had the kind of cash that let him run in leather seats above the clouds while everyone else stayed grounded. Part 2. Well, traffic thickened the closer we got. Then it stopped being traffic at all, just a solid wall of metal. Cars crammed together so tight we crawled inches at a time. Horns blared non-stop, a shrill chorus that set my teeth on edge. Hey, what is it? He demanded, leaning forward. Find another route. Yeah, there isn't one, I said. Everyone's headed for the airport. He cursed and went back to his phone. Yeah, I see the congestion. I'm in it. A pause. How long before they shut the airspace completely? Another pause, and then the color drained from his face. What, that soon? And we leave the second I arrive. Have the pilots start pre-flight now. I nudged the cab forward gap by gap. The terminals came into view ahead. And that's when I saw the people. They were pouring out of the buildings and running, flooding toward parking lots, toward the roads, toward anywhere that wasn't inside those terminals anymore. Hey, why are they running? I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. But he heard. He leaned forward, his face nearly pressed against the partition, trying to get a look. Oh, Jesus Christ, he whispered. And that's when I spotted the plane. It stood into view above the skyline ahead of us. Everything wrong about it from the start. It was too low and was moving too fast. Its nose angled in a way that made no sense. Big commercial jet, wide body, the kind that should have been climbing clean into open sky, not dropping like a stone toward the ground. For maybe 2 seconds I believed, stupidly, that the pilot would correct it. Pull up, fix the angle, save it. He didn't. The sound came first. Not a bang, not even an explosion. This was something deeper. A ripping, tearing roar that felt older than machinery. It was like the earth itself was splitting open. It punched through the air and straight into my chest, rattling my ribs, vibrating my teeth, my bones, every nerve ending. Then, impact. I watched the aircraft slam into the main terminal at a speed that had to be pushing 200 miles an hour. The building didn't crumble. No, it detonated outward. Glass, concrete, steel. Everything blasted in all directions as thousands of tons of metal and fuel transferred their violence into the structure. The fireball followed. Orange and red and black boiling skyward so fast it looked fake, like bad CGI bleeding into reality. The flames surged up and out in waves, towering over the surrounding buildings. Well, you could see the heat itself. The air was bending and shimmering like asphalt in July, only magnified beyond reason. And then the debris started falling. Not just scraps, slabs, torn sections of fuselage, fragments of wing, chunks of terminal wall, raining down hard enough to crush anything beneath them. Cars folded, and people vanished underneath it. The shockwave reached my cab 3 seconds later. The whole vehicle lurched on its suspension, rocking so violently I thought we might tip over. Every window rattled like it wanted to be out of the frame. The blast then rolled over us, not just loud, but physical, pressing against my eardrums until they throbbed. Car alarms erupted across the highway, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. A screaming mechanical chorus. My passenger shouted something to me, but my ears rang too hard to catch it. Through the windshield, I saw people abandoning their vehicles. They were running, not toward the airport anymore, but away from it. Some were shrieking, others just fled in silence, faces blank with shock. But the fire kept building. Thick black smoke clawed upward in a column so dense it looked solid. Secondary blasts rippled through the terminal as fuel tanks ignited, each eruption vomiting fresh towers of flame into the sky. I sat there frozen, my hands locked on the wheel, watching the world collapse. Well, that was the moment it clicked. Not the hospital, not even the man I'd hit. Not the radio whispering about bites and violence and overflowing ERs. No, it was this. A passenger jet crammed with people slamming into a building packed with even more. Hundreds erased in a single blooming inferno still reaching toward the clouds. And something inside me cracked. Not emotionally, well, not yet. That would come later. This was deeper. The part of my brain that had kept reality at arm's length, letting me drive through a worsening day pretending it was just bad luck. That part shattered. A clean break, no illusion left. The world had ended. Sometime between waking up that morning and now, it had ended. And I'd been cruising through it like an idiot, picking up fares, dodging traffic, worrying about bills. "Hey, we need to go back," my passenger said. His voice sounded far away, though, muffled. "We need to get out." I checked the mirror. Behind us, traffic was already trying to turn, but there was nowhere to turn to. Cars jammed bumper to bumper both ways, trapping everyone in a steel cage. Ahead, the blaze devoured everything. People scattered in every direction, and through smoke and flame I saw movement. Figures. Human shapes, but something about them was off. They were moving toward the crowds, not away. Their bodies jerked forward in broken, stuttering rhythms, purposefully. Drawn in by the noise, the chaos, the screaming mass with nowhere left to run. The infected. I slammed the cab into reverse and started backing up, crawling onto the shoulder, the median, any scrap of space I could claim. My passenger was back on his phone, but his voice had lost that steel edge. He sounded small now, frightened, younger even. "Hey, I'm not making it," he said. "The airport's gone. The terminal's building. I need a car ready at my apartment. Not a jet, a car. We're leaving by road." I kept retreating inch by inch, muscling the car through the deadlock because stopping felt like surrender. Motion was the last thing that still made sense. Behind us, the fire kept climbing, licking higher into the sky. The screaming swelled until it blurred into one endless sound, and then a single thought snapped into place in my head, sharp and undeniable. There was nowhere safe in hell. This thought landed fully formed, like a voice had leaned in close and whispered it straight into my skull. I knew it was true the moment it appeared. All safety was gone. Hospitals, airports, apartment buildings, shelters. Anywhere people clustered was already lost or about to be. The idea of refuge was a lie we'd been telling ourselves to stay calm. The only rule left was simple. Stay away from wherever everyone else was running. It took me 40 minutes to pry the cab loose from the mess near JFK. 40 minutes of reversing, edging around stalled and abandoned cars, tires crunching over debris. My guy in the back, some finance type in his expensive suit, just kept hammering his phone, his voice rising as he talked about private jets still, and contingency plans that were evaporating in real time. When I finally got us pointed away from the airport, away from the smoke and flame, he stopped talking. Well, the quiet that followed was worse than his panic. I dropped him back at his building in Manhattan and didn't bother asking for the fare. He stepped out, stood on the curb like he'd forgotten what he was supposed to do next, then wandered into the lobby like a sleepwalker. Never saw him again. It was 12:30 p.m. now, and the city had been bleeding out since morning. But this was the moment it seemed to realize it was dying. I turned back toward Queens, but the streets were mutating while I drove. What had been bad traffic an hour earlier had now turned feral. Cars sat dead in intersections, doors flung open. People ran any direction they could, dragging suitcases, clutching kids, or carrying nothing at all. And threading through them with a horrible single-minded purpose, were the infected. I saw my first one clearly at a red light on Lexington. She stumbled out of a Starbucks, yoga pants shredded, grey hoodie soaked with something dark and tacky. Her blonde hair clung to her face in greasy ropes. Everything about her was wrong in ways my brain could not even catalogue. The waxy grey skin, the slack mouth chewing on nothing, teeth smeared red. But it was her eyes that locked my hands to the wheel. They weren't empty. No. They were hunting. They snapped to motion, tracked it, stayed fixed with a predator's focus. When a man sprinted past her on the sidewalk, she pivoted her whole body toward him and went after him, movements sharp and stuttering, like a corrupted video file skipping frames. She caught him at the corner. In the rearview mirror, I saw her hook his jacket and drag him down. God, he was still screaming when I forced myself to look away. Now the radio had given up on pretending. A broken voice cut through the static. All bridges and tunnels would be closed in 30 minutes. Final warning to evacuate Manhattan. Military forces authorized to use lethal force. Do not approach military positions. Containment zones were already full. Repeat, containment zones were full. The signal fractured then, dissolving into static, then snapping back into clarity like the stations themselves were being torn apart mid-sentence. I turned onto Fifth Avenue and nearly plowed into a wall of people, 200, maybe more, pouring toward me at a dead run. Behind them came the infected, too many to count now, moving together, pulled forward by the noise and motion like sharks to blood. I slammed the cab into reverse and shot down a side street as the crowd surged past the intersection in a human flood. Hands smacked at my windows as they ran, leaving smeared red prints on the glass. Some screamed, others made no sound at all. All the while, the infected followed. They didn't run like normal people. Their bodies jerked and lurched, too fast one second, dragging the next, driven by a broken rhythm that made my skin crawl. But they were closing the distance, and they didn't stop. One of them wore what was left of a business suit, the tie still knotted at his throat like a bad joke. His left arm dangled uselessly, broken or torn loose, flailing as he moved. His right hand was twisted into a claw, his fingers curled and grabbing at the air. Blood soaked the front of his white shirt, poured at his belt in a dark, wet bib. He grabbed a woman wearing a green dress. She hit the pavement hard. Her scream ended almost instantly when he folded over her. Two more of them piled into the same spot, dragged there by the noise and the thrashing. I made myself keep reversing, just keep rolling. Stopping was how you died. Another rule was locked into place, cold and absolute in my mind. Away from people meant away from the infected. Every crowd was bait. Any cluster of humans was already halfway to becoming something worse. Victims and vectors packed together, waiting for the spark. Now the smart move, the only move, was to disappear from everyone else entirely. I cut through side streets, angling south and east, hunting for roads that weren't jammed solid with cars, bodies, or the things that followed bodies. The taxi radio now sped out broken updates between bursts of static. The governor had ordered the National Guard to set a secure perimeter. All civilians should... cut. CDC confirmed transmission via bodily fluids. Bites, scratches, blood, saliva. Incubation estimated at 30 to 90 minutes. Symptoms? Fever, confusion, and escalating aggression. Damn. 30 to 90 minutes. The girl I'd driven to the hospital that morning would be gone by now. The man I clipped on Fifth Avenue. The crowds at the airport. How many people had been tagged in that mess? How many were still walking around, breathing, thinking they were fine, already counting down without knowing it? I passed a police cruiser sitting crooked in an intersection, lights still flashing. No cops, though. Both doors hung open. Blood had pooled beside the driver's side, drying dark on the asphalt. I didn't slow down. Not for a second. At 2nd Avenue, the military showed up. Humvees blocked the road, steel and camouflage cutting the city in half. Soldiers in full kit waved the few surviving vehicles through like they were managing livestock. I rolled my window down as one of them stepped up, barely old enough to shave, an M4 tight against his chest. "Sir, you need to proceed to the containment zone at the Javits Center," he said. His voice stayed level, but his eyes kept flicking to the side streets. "Yeah, I'm getting to Queens," I told him. "I'm trying to get home." "Queens is being evacuated too. Everyone needs to report to designated safe zones. Those are your orders." "Orders?" I stared at him. "Oh, this kid, 22 maybe. Hey, I'm not military." "Martial law's in effect," he said. "Everyone follows orders now." His grip shifted on the rifle. Not aggressive, just ready. Damn, I thought about the hospital, the airport. 200 people stampeding down 5th with monsters snapping at their heels. I pictured the containment zones. Thousands of scared people crushed together, some already infected, ticking bombs with no idea what they were carrying. "Right. I'll go to Javits," I said. Well, I lied. He waved me through. I drove 10 seconds past the checkpoint and cut left at the first chance, steering away from Midtown, away from wherever they were herding people like cattle. Everyone follows orders now. Orders had funneled thousands into a burning airport. Orders were stacking human beings into pens where one bite could light the fuse. Orders were about control, and control was already dead. The rules of the world had cracked wide open, and pretending otherwise was suicide. Part 3. I headed east, sticking to narrow streets, avoiding big avenues where more checkpoints would bloom. The city looked awful in the bright afternoon light. Smoke climbed from scattered fires. Sirens screamed non-stop, layering until they lost meaning. And underneath it all, people ran. People cried. People died. At 1st Avenue, a woman wrestled a rolling suitcase into the trunk of a Honda while 2 teenagers, her kids probably, shouted at her to hurry. An infected man stumbled around the corner in ripped jeans and a flannel shirt, saw them, and sped up. Well, the woman saw him too. She ditched the suitcase, shoved her kids into the car, and floored it. The Civic tore away just as he reached them, his hands slapping the trunk as it vanished down the street. He stood there for a second, his head tilting, scanning for the next thing that moved. The flannel might have been blue once, but now it was mostly dark red. His skin looked bleached, his mouth hung open, a low, wet moan leaking out without purpose. Then he noticed me, sitting 30 yards away in my cab, and he started towards me. I pulled off, not fast. No, sudden moves got you noticed. Slow and steady kept you invisible. I watched him trail me for a block before something else twitched in his peripheral vision and stole his focus. We turned away. The radio crackled again, sharper this time. All bridges into Manhattan will be destroyed at 1500 hours. Repeat, all bridges will be destroyed at 1500 hours to prevent spread of infection. This was not a drill. All evacuation must be complete by 1500. Damn, 3 p.m. I glanced at the clock on the dash, 1:15, less than 2 hours before they dropped the bridges and sealed everyone still breathing on the island into a concrete coffin. For a second, I considered making a run for the Queensboro Bridge, bailing out of Manhattan while escape was still technically possible. Then I pictured it. Gridlock from end to end, thousands of people all thinking the same desperate thoughts. The noise, the panic, the perfect feeding ground for anything that hunted crowds. And the military would be there too, rifles up, eyes scanning for bites, turning people back, maybe putting rounds into anyone that twitched wrong. No, the bridges were going to be death traps. I drove past Roosevelt Island and watched the tram cables stretch across the East River like slack nerves. The cars hung frozen in mid-air, either powered down or simply abandoned when the world had snapped. Below them, the river slid along, dark and heavy, uncaring. It didn't scream, it didn't burn. It just kept moving. The water. The idea hit me like it had been waiting its turn. The bridges would be blown, the tunnels would be sealed or collapsed. But the river didn't need permission. No checkpoints, no crowds, no orders, just cold, black flow cutting through the city. I'd grown up in Queens, summers at public pools, weekends at Rockaway. I wasn't an Olympic swimmer, but I could stay afloat. And the East River wasn't endless. Half a mile, maybe less, if I picked the right spot. If I could reach the shore, if I could rig something up to help me float, I might be able to drift downstream and slip out before the city slammed shut for good. Well, it was insane. God, the water would be cold, maybe 60 degrees. Current strong enough to tear at you. Debris, God knew what else. Maybe infected too. I could cramp, go under, just freeze. There were 100 ways to die. But staying in Manhattan was a death sentence. The bridges were coming down, the infected were multiplying by the minute, and the military, those kids with rifles and shaking hands, drowning in orders cooked up somewhere far from the streets. Yeah, I'd seen it in that soldier's eyes, fear wrapped tight around discipline. How long before the command shifted from contain to erase, from hold the line to shoot anything that moves? Well, I needed supplies. Water bottles, empty ones I could tape together for flotation. Something waterproof to carry whatever mattered. And I needed to reach the river before the hammer fell. I spotted a bodega on 2nd Avenue. Its windows were already smashed, metal gate hanging crooked. I pulled the cab over and sat there for a beat, scanning the street. No infected in sight. No crowds, just distant sirens and the thud of my heartbeat in my ears. I left the engine running and moved fast. Inside, the place looked like it had been shaken upside down. Shelves tipped over, chips and cans ground into the floor. The register gaped open, gutted. Well, I ignored it. Money was dead now. Water. I found a case in the back room, ripped it open, grabbed 6 bottles. A roll of duct tape from behind the counter. A lighter near the cigarettes. In the back I spotted a messenger bag. Synthetic, heavy seams, maybe waterproof enough. I dumped everything inside, slung it over my shoulder and turned for the door. That's when I saw them. They were coming down 2nd Avenue in force. Not just a handful, no. Not dozens even, hundreds. They filled the street curb to curb, a slow grinding tide of ruined bodies and torn clothes, skin smeared dark with drying blood. They moved together, pulled by some distant sound or vibration. I couldn't hear, all of them locked into that same broken rhythm, fast, stiff, but never stopping. Well, instinct took over before my brain could even catch up. I was back in the taxi in a heartbeat. The engine growled, already alive. I slammed it into gear and punched the gas, tearing south away from the oncoming mass. My hand shook on the wheel as the horde swallowed the street behind me. Relentless, unstoppable, and getting closer to everything that was still alive. Now the radio wouldn't shut up, even as it fell apart. Military reports said containment zones in Brooklyn and the Bronx had been breached. Infected numbers were climbing exponentially. All remaining civilians should... Sound of static. Estimates put more than 10,000 infected in Manhattan alone. The infection was spreading faster than... More static. Then a different voice cut in, higher, shaking. Not just bites anymore. Scratches, maybe even contact with infected blood. Anyone exposed needs to... The signal died. I cranked the dial, hunting for anything else. Most stations were gone now. The survivors looped automated warnings or broadcast nothing but dead air. I kept driving, angling south and east, chasing the river. The streets were rotting in real time. More cars left where they stalled. More trash, more bodies. Some of them twitched, but most didn't. At Houston Street, I rolled past the corpse of a containment zone. The military had tried to carve out a safe pocket. Barriers, razor wire, a perimeter wrapped around what looked like a parking structure. But it had failed. The barricades lay scattered. The wire was crushed flat. Soldiers in uniform were sprawled among civilians, torn open, trampled, eaten. Whatever had hit the place had done it recently, within the last hour. Damn, that could have been me. If I'd followed orders, if I'd gone to the Javits Center like the soldier said, I'd be dead now. Or worse, just another infected body inside a secure zone that never stood a chance. The third rule settled in hard and final. Movement was life. Don't stay put. Don't let yourself get boxed in. Don't trust fences, walls, or promises. Just keep moving, keep adjusting. The second you stopped believing that safety was temporary, you were already dead. I drove past the wreckage and kept east. The building shrank, the streets tightened, the air changed. I could smell the river under the smoke and copper stink of blood. At Avenue C, I had to stop. A delivery truck had jackknifed across the road, sealing it off. I sat there with my engine running, scanning for a way round. That's when the explosion hit. Well, it wasn't close, maybe 10 or 15 blocks away, but it was huge. The ground shuddered, windows rattled. A thick column of black smoke climbed into the sky, blooming outward at the top. It was the bridges. Fuck, they'd started early. I didn't think. I bowed out of the cab, grabbed my bag, left the engine running, and moved on foot toward the water. More explosions rolled in from different directions, north, south, west. They were chopping the city into pieces all at once. The streets dissolved into panic. People poured out of buildings, screaming, running blind, crashing into each other. They had no plan, no destination, just terror in motion. I shoved through them, my head down, locked on the river. Oh, the infected were everywhere now. I saw a man in a security uniform with his throat ripped open, sprinting after a woman down an alley. A teenager in a hoodie hunched over something on the pavement, tearing into it. Two infected wrestling over a shape I refused to look at too closely. They swarmed, the noise, the crowds, the chaos, like insects to light. All the while I kept moving. I didn't run. Running marked you. Instead, I walked fast and steady, like I belonged there, like I knew exactly where I was headed. It was bullshit, but confidence was camouflage. I reached the East River at 2:15. The park was almost empty. Anyone smart had fled. Anyone unlucky was dead or hiding. The river lay ahead of me, dark and restless, sliding south toward the bay. On the far side, Brooklyn looked eerily calm. There was no smoke, no visible fires. Looked like they stayed ahead of it, or slowed it enough to keep order intact. Well, behind me, Manhattan was collapsing. Smoke clawed up from dozens of fires. Gunshots cracked non-stop, tangled with sirens, explosions, and screaming. I could see infected drifting through the streets, pulled toward the sound of soldiers fighting a losing war. I walked down to the edge and stared at the water. Oh, cold, black, and moving fast. Oh, this was madness. I was about to throw myself into near-freezing water with nothing but taped-together bottles and some hope. The current could slam me into debris, drag me under, smash me against whatever was left of the bridges that they were blowing apart. The cold would gut my strength in minutes. But, well, behind me was Manhattan, and Manhattan meant death. Certain, absolute, and inevitable. They would have found me sooner or later. The infected or the military. I'd end up herded into some so-called safe zone that would collapse in hours, or they'd decide the island was a lost cause and level it from the air. Either way, I wouldn't be choosing anything. I'd be just another body following arrows and orders until the end came. Now, the river was a risk, but it was my risk. It's the only option that didn't involve crowds, checkpoints, or monsters chasing noise. It gave me agency, even if it would kill me. I dumped all 6 water bottles, screwed the caps down tight, and duct taped them together in pairs. It was crude, ugly, and barely functional, but they floated. I packed what little I had, the lighter, the small knife I'd lifted from the cab, the bottle bundles, into the waterproof bag, and I sealed it. And I stood at the edge, staring at the black water, the far shore, the smoke boiling up behind me, and tried to convince myself to move. I hesitated, maybe 30 seconds, listening to Manhattan tear itself apart behind me. And another explosion thundered through the air. It was closer this time. The ground trembled. Maybe the Williamsburg Bridge giving up. Well, that did it. I stepped off the concrete and dropped into the water. Part 4. The river hit me like a punch from something ancient and angry. Ice flooded my chest as the air blasted out my lungs and vanished. For a few seconds I couldn't breathe, I couldn't even think. Just felt the water clawing at me, dragging me down. My clothes turned into anchors, and my shoes filled instantly. The bottle strapped to my chest hauled me back up, though, and I broke the surface, choking, sucking in air that scorched my throat. The current grabbed me immediately and started hauling me south, away from the park, away from everything familiar. I tried to swim, tried to angle myself, but the river didn't care. It rolled me like trash, slowly spinning me so Manhattan and Brooklyn traded places in my vision. From water level, Manhattan looked like the end of the world. Smoke climbed in thick, oily columns, blending into a single black mass overhead. Fires burned everywhere. The noise carried across the river, explosions, gunfire, sirens that never stopped. And beneath it all was the screaming. Thousands of voices layered together into a constant ragged howl that crawled under my skin even through the cold. I focused on staying afloat. The bottles helped, but not much. The current twisted and surged, pulling me sideways, down, back up. Debris drifted past. Wood, plastic, a tire. Shapes I refused to study too closely. I kicked to stay vertical, kept my mouth above water, and tried not to think about how fast the cold was winning. Well, it was worse than I'd expected. 5 minutes in and my fingers had gone numb. 10 minutes my feet were gone. My teeth chattered so hard I split my tongue. Blood mixed with the river every time I swallowed. I drifted past the Williamsburg Bridge, or what remained of it. The center span was gone, dropped into the river in shattered slabs of concrete and twisted steel. Cars sat at insane angles on the broken sections that still clung to the towers. Some had bodies inside. Some were empty, doors yawning open. Whoever had been inside had probably been thrown clear when it blew. The infected lined both approaches, drawn by the blast. They crowded the edge where the bridge ended in open air. Some of them just walked straight off. I saw one fall. A woman in shredded jeans and a tank top stained almost black. She hit the water maybe 50 yards from me, vanished under the surface, and never came back up. Could they swim? Did they still know how? I didn't want to learn the answer to that, so I kicked harder, desperate to put distance between myself and where she'd gone under, even as the current dragged me past. The river widened as I drifted south. Brooklyn slid away to my left, Manhattan to my right, both shores stretching farther out of reach. The water got rougher, short waves slapping my face, stealing breaths. My arms felt like dead weight. My legs barely answered when I told them to move. The cold sank deeper, fogging my thoughts, slowing everything down. I needed land, soon, before my body shut itself off. Well, Brooklyn was too far. I didn't have the strength to fight the current. Manhattan was closer, but Manhattan meant death. I could still see infected prowling the waterfront, still hear the city coming apart piece by piece. And so I floated, fought to stay awake as I watched it burn. I passed under the Manhattan Bridge around 3 o'clock, though time had stopped meaning much by now. The bridge still stood, barely. Military vehicles blocked both ends. Soldiers fired down at infected trying to cross from Manhattan. Muzzle flashes lit the underpass. Tracers stitched red lines through the smoke. Bodies tumbled from the bridge and hit the water around me. One landed so close I felt it through the river. A man in a police uniform, vest strapped tight, badge still pinned. He floated down, arms spread, drifting toward Brooklyn. I watched him until the current bent and carried me away, and he slipped out of sight. The Brooklyn Bridge came next. I saw it from a distance, the stone towers rising like tombstones, the cable stretched between them like strings on some massive instrument. Then I saw the F-18 lining up its run. Jets had been screaming overhead all afternoon, but this was the first time I saw one commit. The missile dropped from under the wing in a cough of smoke, surged forward and punched straight into the bridge's center span. Oh, the blast was colossal. Even from a quarter-mile out, the shockwave ripped through the river and into me, hammering my chest and popping my ears. The span didn't fall, though. It vanished. It broke apart in midair and fell into the water as everything from car-sized slabs to fine grey dust. The suspension cables snapped loose and whipped wildly, one of them scything through a trapped truck. The truck detonated a heartbeat later, its fireball folding into larger inferno. Debris poured into the river. I dove instinctively as concrete and steel smashed down around me, dark shapes tearing through the water like falling planets. When I clawed my way back to the surface, gasping, the bridge was gone. Only the towers remained, standing alone like gravestones, marking where a crossing used to exist. That was it. Every bridge was down. Manhattan was an island again, sealed tight. Anyone still there was finished, dead or infected sooner or later. Faces flickered through my head. Oh, that businessman with his frantic calls and imaginary escape plans. The family with the little girl clutching a broken stuffed elephant. The college couple at the hospital. The woman in the business suit yelling into her phone. Everyone I'd driven that day. Everyone who was probably already gone. Then my thoughts drifted to Queens. My apartment, the unmade bed, the water stain on the ceiling. Instant coffee, unpaid bills. My neighbor's alarm screaming every morning at 6. Small, stupid things. All of it erased, or about to be. The city I'd spent 8 years driving through was dying, and I was drifting away from it in a river that was trying to kill me too. The cold deepened. My shivering stopped, which I dimly understood was bad. My thoughts came apart, sliding away from each other. I kept losing track of why I was in the water, what I was trying to do. The bottle still held me up, but I couldn't feel my hands anymore. Wasn't sure if I was gripping my bag. Now Brooklyn looked closer. Or maybe I was just moving without noticing. The current twisted unpredictably, dragging me sideways, then forward. Through the fog creeping into my brain, I saw a concrete barrier along the shore. Beyond it, the shape of a pier or marina. I tried to swim. Oh, my arms moved slowly, clumsily, like they belonged to someone else. My legs were dead weight. The river carried me anyway, pushing me until my shoulder smacked hard into concrete. I tried hard for the barrier, missed. Tried again. This time I managed to hook one arm over the edge. I hauled with everything I had left and dragged myself partly out of the water. I collapsed onto the concrete, shaking, sucking air, trying to remember how to make my body obey. The sun was low now, stretching long shadows across the waterfront. The air felt warm compared to the river. Probably wasn't more than 60 degrees, though, but after that water it felt like July. I stayed there until sensation crept back into my legs, until the shaking eased from violently to barely manageable. And then I forced myself upright. Rolling to my side, pushing to hands and knees, standing unsteadily, using the barrier to keep from falling. And across the water, Manhattan burned. The skyline was swallowed by smoke. Orange fire flickered in dozens of windows. Explosions still rolled now and then, each one sending fresh smoke into the darkening sky. The noise was distant, dulled by water and space, reduced to a constant low thunder broken by occasional heavy booms. I turned away from it and faced Brooklyn. This stretch was quiet, empty. A few squat buildings, warehouses, a road running along the water. No people. No infected that I could see. Just shadows, stillness, and the stink of river water mixed with smoke. I staggered away from the barrier, my legs barely cooperating, and found a warehouse with its door hanging open, and slipped inside. The darkness felt safer than the exposed shore. I collapsed on the concrete floor, wet clothes plastered to my skin, and lay there listening to my heartbeat, my breathing, and the distant sound of a city finishing its death. I must have blacked out. When I woke again, it was fully dark. The warehouse was lit only by the orange glow of fires reflecting off low clouds. I was shaking violently, my body clawing for heat it couldn't find. I needed dry clothes, warmth, movement, anything to stop the cold from shutting me down for good. I forced myself up. My bag was still slung over my shoulder. Somehow the seal had held. The lighter was dry, though my hand shook so badly it took effort to spark it. I searched the warehouse, found old cardboard and broken pallets, and built a small fire in the corner, far from anything that could let it spread. The heat was indescribable. I stripped off my soaked clothes and laid them near the flames. Sat there naked, shivering, staring into the fire, thinking about the 3 rules that had kept me alive while the world fell apart. There was no safe place in hell. I'd learned that by watching the plane hit the airport, watching people run toward places they thought could save them. Hospitals, containment zones, bridges. Every one of them had turned into a slaughterhouse. Anywhere people believed they were protected became a magnet for death. Away from people meant away from the infected. Every crowd I'd seen that day had been swallowed up. Every cluster of humans had burned bright and fast, drawing the infected like insects to a flame. Safety didn't exist in numbers. It existed in absence. Movement was life. Staying put meant waiting to be boxed in when the rules shifted again. The cab driver who never stopped. The infected who never slowed. Motion wasn't chaos, it was strategy. 3 rules, brutally simple. Obvious once you survive long enough to see them clearly. They carried me through 12 hours of hell while thousands of others hadn't made it. I stayed by the fire until my clothes were mostly dry, until sensation crept back into my fingers and toes, until my thoughts stopped drifting apart. When my head cleared enough to think past the next breath, I packed what little I had and stepped back out into the night. Brooklyn was quieter now. Manhattan still glowed across the water, but the noise had thinned out. Fewer explosions, fewer sirens. Either things were stabilizing, or there was nobody left to scream. And I didn't believe in miracles. I walked north through empty streets, hugging shadows moving with care. A few times I spotted infected wandering in the distance, aimless now without crowds or noise to lock onto. Without stimulation, they looked almost harmless, just broken figures drifting through the dark. I gave them space, and they never noticed me. Near midnight, I reached a highway. Cars sat abandoned, nose to tail, a frozen river of steel and glass stretching into the distance. I walked between them, peering inside, testing doors. Locked, empty, dead. Then I found the truck. An old Ford pickup, maybe 15 years old, parked crooked on the shoulder. Driver's door open. Key still in the ignition. I climbed in, half expecting nothing to happen. The engine fired immediately. The gas gauge sat just below full. On the passenger seat was a book. The Zombie Apocalypse Survival Guide. I stared at it for a second and then laughed. The sound surprised me. Rough, cracked, but real. This was probably some novelty junk, a joke gift, something meant to be ironic. I flipped it open under the dome light. Rule 1. There's no safe place during an outbreak. Hospitals will be overrun, military bases will fall. Any location that attracts crowds will become a death trap. Safety is temporary and usually imaginary. I laughed again, louder this time. I turned the page. Rule 2. Avoid other survivors when possible, especially in the early stages. Crowds attract the infected. Groups create noise and movement. The safest survivor is the one who travels alone. The book fell open on another section, like it was insisting. Rule 3. Keep moving. Never remain in one location for long. Static positions become targets. A moving survivor is harder to track, harder to corner, harder to kill. Movement equals survival. I sat there reading this while Manhattan burned somewhere behind me. Whoever had written this probably never thought anyone would see it. Probably wrote it as a joke. But, well, they'd nailed it. Every word matched what I'd learned the hard way, through fire, blood, panic, and freezing water. I closed the book, set it on the dashboard, and started the truck, and pulled on to the empty highway. I drove away from the city, away from the smoke, away from the infected and the dead and everything I'd known. The road ahead disappeared into darkness. Didn't know where it led. Didn't know what waited out there, but I was alive. Against logic, against probability, I'd survived the first day. In the rearview mirror, New York City burned. The skyline I'd known for 8 years barely showed through the smoke. Flames crawled up buildings that would never be lived in again. Bridges I'd crossed 1,000 times lay shattered in the river. Streets I knew better than my own apartment were packed with corpses, infected or both. 8 million people had lived there yesterday. How many were left? A few thousand, maybe. Scattered survivors hiding in ruins or running through the dark. The rest were dead, or worse, wandering the wreckage of their city, driven by instincts they didn't understand toward prey they couldn't stop chasing. I drove through the night. The book sat on the dashboard. The radio was dead. No broadcasts, no warnings, no voices begging for help that would never come. Just static. And then, nothing. As dawn began to thin the sky, I passed a sign, leaving New York City limits. Well, the realization of this hit me harder than any explosion. I'd actually done it. Escaped from one of the biggest cities on the planet on the first day of the end. Not by following orders, not by trusting safe zones or officials or crowds, but by doing the opposite of everything everyone else had done. By breaking the rules. By jumping into a freezing river when sanity said stay on the land. I survived by making my own rules. The highway stretched ahead into morning. I didn't know what waited out there. Other survivors? Ruins? Maybe nothing at all. I didn't know if I'd live another day or another hour. But I had a truck with gas. I had a survival guide written as a joke and proven in blood. And I had the experience of surviving one day. Day one. Most importantly, I was still moving. The sun rose behind me, throwing my shadow long across the empty road. Ahead, the asphalt rolled on into the unknown, and I followed it, leaving the burning city in my past. Because movement was life. I glanced again at the book on the dashboard, smiled without humor, and kept driving. Hell didn't have safe places. It was time to move. Well, my dear friends, we return to the zombie apocalypse. Hope you enjoyed that episode of the Outbreak series. Back to New York, but pretty different from the last time we were here. Same ending, though. So, thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to say in the comment section below the video? Glad to be working with the author again, and long may this series continue. Well, my dear friends, that is it for this Monday evening. Another hour-long story for you again. Hope you enjoyed it, as I said, and I'll be back again very soon. Podcast over on Channel 2 tomorrow, and pretty much everywhere you find your podcasts, Dr. Creepin's Dungeon. And back here on Wednesday with the continuation, or the finishing of the cool 1890 story I did last Wednesday, the final 5 chapters. Till then, my dear friends, remember it's just a story and you all sleep well, yeah? Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.